you? Ted. It's the Grim Reaper, dude. Oh.
Where are we?
How's it hanging, Death?
You're in the middle. Between the two. The real and the shadow. Right now you're in a kind of limbo. You're neither here nor there.
Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
Hey gang, welcome back to Between Light and Shadow, the podcast that fearlessly rubs elbows with the specter of death himself and asks to borrow $20 till payday. Hey, times are tough. Don't be judging me.
Who are you? Death. Have you come for me? I have long walked at your side. Yes, I know. Are you ready? My flesh is frightened. My heart is calm. Wait just a minute. You all ask that, but I give no reprieve. You play chess, I understand. How do you know? Oh, I know it from poetry and from old legends. If I may say so, I am considered an excellent player. You cannot be more skilled than I. Why do you want to play chess with me? That's my affair. As you wish. The bargain is you let me live as long as I would stand you. If I checkmate you, I go free. You draw black. Very appropriate. Don't you agree?
That's a clip from Ingmar Bergman's 1957 masterpiece, The Seventh Seal, which is one of my all-time favorite films. And I generally insist on watching films in their original languages, but I went with the English dub here because I'm betting most of you don't know Swedish. Plus, you really can't see subtitles on a podcast. Now, the film concerns, among other things, a chess match between a Crusades-era knight named Antonius Block and Death himself. If you've never seen it, you're probably at least familiar with the look of the Death character, which is basically a black hooded robe and a white painted face. No? Okay, have you seen Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey? Yeah, there you go.
Excellent!
The Seventh Seal should be required viewing for anybody with even a passing interest in film. It's an absolute masterpiece. It drew me not only to the films of Ingmar Bergman, but foreign films in general. Seek it out if you aren't familiar with it. It just so happens that the episodes we're discussing this week share something in common with the Seventh Seal. Namely, the concept of death as a physical human being on the hunt for those unfortunate bastards whose time is up. Historical depictions of death incarnate are often skeletons wielding a scythe and or an hourglass. Now, in the Twilight Zone, death manifests as regular-looking human guys. A stiff in a suit, a bum hitching a ride, and a cop with a bullet in him. Which is kind of ingenious. I mean, who would ever suspect them? So maybe The Seventh Seal isn't the best big screen example, since Bergman's Death incarnate is identifiable as Death. He wears no disguise and never attempts to pass himself off as human. I can think of two other examples that probably fit better. First, Jean Cocteau's 1950 film Orpheus, or Orphée, if you want to be all French about it. Orpheus features Death disguised as a female princess. We never see her actually claim any souls. In fact, she actually reverses time to bring one character back to life. Now, Orpheus is another of my top 10 favorite films. So I've got to wonder, do I have some sort of death fetish? The other example is actually the oldest, 1934's Death Takes a Holiday, in which Death takes on human form not for reaping purposes, but to try to understand why people are so afraid of him. Incidentally, Death Takes a Holiday was directed by Mitchell Leeson, who directed 3 Twilight Zones, including Escape Clause, which we just covered last week, and the 16mm Shrine, which we covered the week before. So first up this week, we have Rod Serling's One for the Angels, which was first telecast on October 9th, 1959. It was the 6th episode produced, but the 2nd to air. I'm endlessly fascinated when production order differs from air dates. I'm not sure why this one was shown so early, except maybe to lighten things up a bit after Where Is Everybody, the pilot the week before, which was kind of dark and moody. One for the Angels was directed by Robert Parrish, who would come back later in the first season to direct the excellent A Stop at Willoughby and the not so excellent The Mighty Casey, both of which were also written by Serling. Louis J. Bookman is an elderly chap who sells trinkets on street corners. He's a pitchman, which isn't nearly as common a trade in these modern times as it was 5 decades ago. A snappily dressed guy jots down entries in a notebook as he watches Lou hawk his wares. No mystery who this individual is. Mere seconds into the prologue, Serling introduces him to us by name.
Mr. Death.
Lou's time is up, says Mr. Death. But Lou doesn't want to go. Unfortunately, he doesn't qualify for any of the allowable exceptions.
We do listen to appeals, but frankly, Mr. Bookman, there's very little here in the way of an extenuating circumstance. There are 3 major categories of appeals. One is hardship cases. The second category is priority cases, statesmen, scientists, men on the verge of discoveries. I don't think you're qualified here either. Unfinished business of a major nature.
Something a man has yearned for and something he might accomplish given an extension.
Lou, however, indicates that he does have unfinished business.
Well, there is one thing. Between you and me, I never made a truly big pitch. I mean a big pitch. A pitch big enough for the skies to open up. You know, a pitch for the angels. Of course, that wouldn't mean very much to you, but it would mean a great deal to me. It would mean that for one moment in my whole life, I would have done something successful. It would mean that maybe the children would be very proud of me.
Mr. Death agrees to grant a temporary reprieve until Lou completes this ultimate pitch. But he does ask, when can they expect it? Lou's a crafty one. He has no intention of ever pitching anything again, in effect forestalling his demise indefinitely. And he has no problem throwing what amounts to an FU in Mr. Death's face. Now, Lou is something of a fixture in his neighborhood, and all the neighborhood kids adore him. One in particular, a little girl named Maggie, who lives in his building, seems to share a special bond with him. And here's where Death F's Lou right back.
Mr. Bookman, it won't just end here, you understand. There'll be consequences, you see. I've been forced to select an alternative.
Maggie is hit by a car and hovers near death. And that night, Lou stands vigil outside the building. Mr. Death appears near midnight, intent on taking Maggie with him. Lou has his merchandise case with him, and he sets up for a late-night pitch. Mr. Death watches bemusedly at first as Lou bumbles through his spiel, but he gradually falls under what emerges as an impressive, near-hypnotic pitch. Midnight strikes, and Mr. Death has missed his appointed time. Lou has saved Maggie by delivering his pitch for the angels. He willingly accompanies Mr. Death to...
Up there?
Up there, Mr. Bookman. You made it.
Lou Bookman is played by Ed Wynn, who would return to the Twilight Zone 5 years later for the episode 90 Years Without Slumbering. Mr. Death is played by Murray Hamilton, who you probably know better as the mayor in Jaws and Jaws 2. Now, before we really get into this, let's address the elephant in the room. Lou is a fucking terrible pitchman. He feebly tosses out his spiel, barely speaking above a disenchanted mumble. Now, age notwithstanding, he should possess at least a bit more sparkle and be at least a bit more engaging. I'm not sure if this is a direction issue or an Ed Wynn issue. Maybe it's both. I have no desire to buy anything from him based on the opening scene, which is not a good first impression in a story in which the life of a child will hinge on his ability to push product. Now, things do improve with the appearance of this week's other male lead, that spectral rascal Mr. Death. I like how he breaks the fourth wall when Serling introduces him at the end of the prologue by name, which is in and of itself fun. I can't help wonder what his first name is. Is he Joe Death? Steve Death? Kevin Death? Richard Death? And if he is Richard Death, does he go by Dick for short? Dick Death? Man, that makes him even scarier. Guys, am I right? So Mr. Death looks directly into the camera for a moment, and then, just as we fade out for a commercial break, goes back to writing in his notebook, as if he's recording his observations on you, the viewer. A nice bit of grim pre-reaping, if you will. Act 1 finds Lou surrounded by children. Now, I'm sure this is the overprotective parent in me talking, but my hackles go up at the idea of a single elderly bachelor spending his free time with kids, providing them with toys and treats in exchange for their company and affection. No, I'm not calling Lou a pedophile. I'm just saying it feels a bit sketchy, particularly in this age of hyper-awareness with regards to child safety. Now, I know Lou's relationship with the kids is meant to be innocent and charming, and I'm sure 1959 audiences didn't bat an eye, but I think today's network execs might bristle a bit. I should also mention that out of a group of 7 or 8 kids, he only gives 2 of them toys. In real life, the rest of those kids would be screaming bloody murder.
Now, the Lou Bookman social and ice cream hour takes place right after supper. The regular time now. Don't forget. Bye, goodbye. Bye. Don't forget the ice cream now.
Wait, what? Did you catch that? Let's try to isolate that a little better.
Don't forget the ice cream now.
Let's slow it down some.
Don't forget the ice cream now.
Yeah, there it is. He's throwing an ice cream social and he's making the kids bring the fucking ice cream? Seriously? Upon finding Mr. Death in his apartment, whose identity he doesn't know yet, Lou's first reaction isn't to threaten to call the police, since he has an intruder in his home and stuff. Rather, he assumes the guy must be a customer, because, you know, everybody knows he's a pitchman and is totally welcome to come on in, even when he's not home. Does he have a fucking sign on his door? Apparently, the Death business herein is a corporate bureaucracy of sorts. Mr. Death wears a suit and tie and keeps a very detailed notebook because, in his own words, we have to keep these things efficient. He also suggests that there are other Mr. Deaths when he says, "We aren't permitted to forewarn people." That's a paraphrase. And I guess there'd have to be several of him, considering he spends an entire day and night on Lou's case alone, and there would almost certainly be other people dying that same day. I'm reminded a bit of the 1954 Philip K. Dick story, The Adjustment Team, which inspired the 2011 feature film, The Adjustment Bureau, in which mankind's actions are subtly directed by an elaborate network of supernatural beings, some of whom act as angels of death when necessary. You know, the Adjustment Bureau would make a great name for a chiropractor's office. Any chiropractors out there? You can have that one. First one's free. Now, after Lou has tricked Mr. Death, or so he thinks, he tries to beat a hasty retreat down the stairs. Mr. Death repeatedly appears before him as he reaches each landing. It's a clever touch that keeps things light. However, things suddenly get dark when the consequence of Lou's deceit becomes clear. Maggie is chosen to die in his place. A shadow crosses her face, and we hear Mr. Death's signature music cue again. Make no mistake, kids. Shit just got real up in here. Act 2 gets off to a bang by introducing us to one of the most maddeningly inept doctors ever seen on television. A child has been struck by a moving vehicle and should have been rushed by ambulance to the nearest hospital for x-rays to, rule out possible internal injuries and stuff. Nope. Instead, Dr. Quentin Quack's treatment plan is to put her in bed and monitor her for an unspecified crisis that may or may not occur at some point before midnight. Exactly what the hell is this unspecified crisis? Death by hemorrhaging? It would have actually made more sense for Serling to have her in the local emergency room and have Lou intercept Mr. Death in the hospital parking lot. Mr. Death at a hospital? That's just dripping with story potential, right? Shit, that could be a whole anthology series. Mr. Death has a new soul to claim each week, in a different city, maybe even at different times in history. Maybe sometimes he'll let people go out of mercy. Has this been done before? Did I just create an awesome new TV series? Now, as Lou sets up his late-night pitch, Mr. Death indicates that he wouldn't be much of a customer, which makes perfect sense, given that he's a supernatural entity and therefore wouldn't need to buy anything. This sensible fact is subsequently undermined by the fact that he starts bleeding cash beneath the crushing weight of Lou's pitch. Now, I ask you, dear listener, why the hell does this spectral agent of death have cash on him? Is it like his lunch allowance?
An item never before offered in this or any other country. 1 guaranteed live human manservant.
How's that?
For what I ask, you shall receive a willing, capable, worldly, highly sophisticated, wonderfully loyal right-hand man to use in any capacity you see fit.
How's that?
Yikes. Now there's a cringe-worthy moment. Lou apparently forgot about fucking slavery, which has been going on all over the world since basically the dawn of civilization. And then the clock strikes midnight, and Maggie's gonna be okay after all. Mr. Death is pretty pissed that he missed his deadline, but cue the irony. By distracting Mr. Death and saving Maggie, Lou pulled off the big pitch he's always dreamed of. And since his last bit of unfinished business is, well, finished, there's no reason he can't die as planned. Lou walks off into the night with Mr. Death, no hard feelings. I guess that's a happy ending. Except, well, Maggie's gonna wake up from the trauma of getting ran over and find out her best friend has fucking died. And worst yet, he died on the sidewalk out in front of her building, right? I mean, we don't see his corpse, but since he leaves the stoop with Mr. Death, I think it's safe to assume that that's where it happened. Morning's gonna come, somebody's gonna find him laying there on the steps, a goofy smile on his face, and the whole neighborhood will mourn. Yeah, happy ending. But you're not supposed to think about that. The cute little girl lived, and old Lou went to heaven.
You never know who might need something up there. Up there?
Up there, Mr. Bookman. You made it.
Bullshit. I don't believe in heaven per se, but if there is some spiritual realm that awaits us after we slough off this mortal coil, I'm pretty fucking sure you can't bring your suitcase with you, right? Okay, maybe I'm being too hard on what is probably meant as nothing more than a cute joke. Oh, and after Death takes the bait and misses his deadline, we get one more maddeningly stupid update from Dr. Mike Malpractice regarding Maggie's status. After being smacked by an oncoming car and surviving past midnight, all she'll need now is sedatives and lots of rest. What? Jesus, somebody get this guy in front of a medical review board pronto. He's played by Jay Overholtz, who is for goddamn sure not a doctor, but he plays one on TV, Dr. J appears in a total of 8 Twilight Zones, and sadly, this is probably his meatiest role out of the 8. That ominous little music cue is called Fade In by Bernard Herrmann. It recurs throughout the episode to punctuate each appearance by Mr. Death. Now, it's from the score for an unsold pilot called The House on K Street, which ended up being dumped into the CBS Music Library, a massive archive of library music by many of the prominent composers of the day, including Jerry Goldsmith, Fred Steiner, and of course, Bernard Herrmann. In fact, even though the music in this episode is pulled from different parts of the library, almost all of them are by Herrmann, including a couple of my all-time favorites. What you're hearing right now is called Starlight, or more technically, Outer Space Suite Part 7. We hear it near the end of the episode when Lou leaves with Mr. Death. Right before that, we hear a cue called Time Suspense, which plays while Lou delivers his pitch for the Angels. It'll show up several more times in the series, most prominently in Third from the Sun. Now, the CBS Music Library is seriously a treasure trove for anyone even remotely interested in film and television music, which I am hugely. Now, as we've discussed in other episodes, Rod Serling adapted several of his Twilight Zone teleplays into short stories for 3 paperback collections between 1961 and 1963. He didn't do this for One for the Angels, however, the episode was turned into a short story in 1985 by Anne Serling, his daughter. And it's pretty close to the episode, except for one odd detail. Here's her description of Lou. At 7 a.m. prompt, he was behind his pitch stand, with everything set up and a few children already surrounding him. They loved him, this dumpy, shabby little man in the mangled seersucker suit, with his pants invariably too short and his coat too long. A flamboyant tie hung askew at his neck with a misshapen knot, and a summer pork pie tilted rakishly and idiotically at an angle on his head. These set off the odd, bizarre quality of the little man and made him even more endearing in the children's eyes. So, she pretty much nails the wardrobe, but dumpy little man with an odd, bizarre quality? Ed Wynn was 6 feet tall. It doesn't add anything to the story, and it's almost a bit insulting to Wynn's memory. Anyway, the story was written for a book called The Twilight Zone, The Original Stories in 1985, which collected all the pre-existing stories that were adapted for the series. Anne Serling actually has 2 stories in there. She also does The Changing of the Guard, which was also from a Serling script. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of the whole point of the book, right? Hey, here's all the original Twilight Zone stories before they became Twilight Zone episodes, but we're going to throw in a couple of newly written stories based on original Twilight Zone episodes. And the stories are arranged chronologically to match the original air dates of the episodes, so One for the Angels is the very first story in it. So immediately, right out of the gate, it's not the quote-unquote original stories, is it? I do get that they were trying to get something Serling in there someplace, since there weren't any actual stories written by him. All his teleplays were original, except for the ones he adapted from other people's stories. So at least this way there's a Serling in the book. But yeah, I don't know. Does it add anything of value to the book? I say no. And the choices just baffle me too. Of all the Serling scripts you could adapt, you pick One for the Angels and The Changing of the Guard? Really? Well, okay, Changing of the Guard is a pretty great episode, but there are so many better options. On the whole, One for the Angels, The episode, not Anne Serling's retro, non-original story, ain't exactly top-shelf Twilight Zone, but it ain't half bad either. Ed Wynn is certainly charming, but a more articulate, faster-talking actor might have made for a more convincing pitchman. Nothing against the old guy, but I'd probably like this one a lot more with a different actor in the role. Murray Matheson kind of saves the day as Mr. Death. He comes off as a bit of an officious prick, but he's never unlikable, and was therefore not subjected to the dick test. And hey, if nothing else, the episode gives us our very first taste of a fascinating phenomenon that will permeate all 5 seasons of The Twilight Zone. Whenever you see a flying saucer, or a spaceship crew uniform, or an exotic rocky alien planet backdrop, or some funky piece of futuristic technology on the Twilight Zone, it almost always comes from Forbidden Planet, the 1956 sci-fi classic from MGM. As I did my blog, I'll point them out as we come across them. This first Forbidden Planet connection is a doozy. The very first shot of the episode is a close-up of a Robbie the Robot wind-up toy, which Lou is hawking as part of his curbside peddling gig. The full-size version of Robbie will return for 2 episodes in the 5th season, Uncle Simon and the Brain Center of Whipples. I don't know, we may end up tackling these 2 episodes together down the road solely because of the Robbie connection. Plus, there's a lot of yelling in both of them, so they have that in common too. Speaking of Forbidden Planet, I had the pleasure of seeing it on the 3-story high screen at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry's Empirical Theater here in Portland last year. Now, I've seen the film many times in my life, but never that big. It was amazing. You haven't truly seen Anne Francis in all her glory until you've seen her projected 3 stories high. Talk about attack of the 50-foot woman. 50-foot Anne Francis, you can attack me anytime. Fast forward a few months or so, the Twilight Zone crosses paths with Death again. This time, he's got his scythe-like thumb pointed at the gorgeous Inger Stevens, who we enjoyed recently in The Lateness of the Hour. The episode is The Hitchhiker, which has a fascinating history behind it and really deserves to have a full episode devoted to it. Therefore, we're going to cover it next week. So yeah, this installment of the podcast just became a 2-part episode. Boom! You didn't see that coming, did you? We're just full of surprises up in here. So we're going to skip ahead even further to Death's 3rd and final appearance on the Twilight Zone, which happens to be his kindest, gentlest, prettiest manifestation. Nothing in the Dark opens with an old woman named Wanda Dunn cowering in a dark apartment. There's a scuffle outside, then a gunshot. Someone feebly calls out for help from just outside her front door, but Wanda isn't biting. She knows who he is. He's Death, and she's sure as hell not going to open the door for him. He insists that his name is Harold Belden, and he's a police officer, and not at all a scary supernatural agent of death, and in fact, he himself will die of his injuries if she doesn't help him. He convinces her to let him in, and gets her to tell him her story while she tends to his wounds.
I haven't always lived like this. I was young once. People said I was pretty. I lived out in the sunlight. People said I'd spoil my fine complexion. I didn't care. I loved outdoor things. I lived out in the sunlight. I've always hated the dark and the cold. I'm old. I've lived a long time, but I don't want to die. I'd rather live in the dark than not live at all.
Wanda's building is condemned, but she's ignored the letters telling her to vacate. It turns out today is demolition day, and when the contractor shows up and forces his way in, Wanda takes him for Death and promptly collapses. When she comes to, she's shocked to discover that she's not dead. The contractor explains that when he tears things down, it's only so new things can be built. A building is just like anything else. It has a lifespan. at the end of which it must be cleared away, just like people. And this building is coming down, so she needs to pack up and vacate now, otherwise he'll be back with the police. After he leaves, Wanda realizes that he couldn't see Harold, and the terrible truth dawns on her. Harold is Mr. Death after all. But she's confused. He was kind to her, not a fearsome creature at all. He convinces her to take his hand.
You see? No shock, no engulfment, no tearing asunder. What you feared would come like an explosion is like a whisper. What you thought was the end, at the beginning.
Nothing in the Dark was written by George Clayton Johnson, who was at least partially responsible for a total of 7 episodes of The Twilight Zone. He wrote 4 original teleplays, and 3 other episodes were based on unpublished stories he had written. It was directed by Lamont Johnson, who directed a total of 8 episodes, and... wait, they're both Johnsons? I wonder if they were related. Let me consult Zickery real quick. Aha! Right there on page 222 of the Twilight Zone Companion. No relation to George Clayton Johnson. Thanks, Mark. Anyway, the episode was first broadcast on January 5th, 1962. It was the 3rd Lamont Johnson directed episode to air, but it was actually his first directing job on the show. Turns out it was produced during season 2, but held back until halfway into season 3. Why exactly? Let's consult Zickery again. Nothing there. Let me consult Grams. Okay. Page 111 of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr. tells us that Nothing in the Dark was basically a casualty of scheduling. It was originally intended to be the season 2 finale, but was bumped by The Obsolete Man, which was considered a stronger episode. Which, okay, yeah, definitely is. There, mystery solved. Let's move on. Nothing in the Dark is a simple story, but there's a richness to it, a substance. It's impossible not to sympathize with Wanda, even though she's completely to blame for her circumstances. She's so afraid of dying that she's given up having any semblance of an actual life. Her quest to avoid death at any cost has caused her to barricade herself in darkness, alone, afraid. Did she ever have a husband or children? We never find out. But we do learn that she was once a free-spirited young woman. That moment where she remembers that she used to love being outside in the sun, then reaches out to touch a patch of sunlight on the floor, is moving. It's heartbreaking. And I know how she feels. After a long, wet, gray, depressing Pacific Northwest winter, I always cheer up immensely when spring finally, springs. The clouds disperse and the sun comes bursting forth. It's magical, glorious. Those of you in warmer climates, my friends in LA, for example, have no concept of the struggle we face up here. You know, maybe Wanda and I both suffer from seasonal affective disorder, which I used to write off as total bullshit, but I now suspect may be a legitimate diagnosable condition, kind of like fibromyalgia or gluten intolerance or whiskey dick. Now, obviously, there's a lot more going on with Wanda than just the weather blues. She's very obviously mentally ill. She suffers from what's commonly called death anxiety, which is the morbid, abnormal, or persistent fear of one's own mortality. It's also called thanatophobia. Now, the elderly are statistically more susceptible to death anxiety, which makes total sense, but Wanda's fear isn't simply based on her age. Now, we aren't given an exact timeline, but it does seem that she's suffered this fear for much of her life before she ever grew old. She isn't just phobic. Her fear is pathological, monomaniacal. There's probably an obsessive-compulsive aspect at work here as well. Nothing in the Dark features some really nice cinematography, which sounds weird since it takes place in one room. I guess I'm referring more to the lighting than the camera movements. Wanda lives in the shadows, so that's what we see. A lot of shadows, very minimal lighting. It's very atmospheric. When the contractor forces his way in, the flood of sunlight that accompanies him feels like a violation of sorts, which I guess it is, since Wanda's cocoon has just been breached.
How can you live like this?
But if I don't live like this, I won't live at all. If I don't watch out, if I let down even for a moment, he'll get in. I know he will.
Nothing in the Dark is blessed with the amazing Gladys Cooper in the lead as Wanda. She's in 2 other episodes of The Twilight Zone, Passage on the Lady Anne and Night Call, plus she's in Outer Limits, The Borderland. And monster kids everywhere will chase me with torches and pitchforks if I fail to mention that she was in 1941's The Black Cat from Universal, which starred Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. So yeah, she's monster kid royalty. We've also got the very talented R.G. Armstrong in the cast as the unnamed contractor. And then there's Mr. Death, played very attractively by Robert Redford. He looks great, so boyish and handsome. He's particularly striking lying there in the snow in the prologue. That's some straight-up male model material action right there. And then he opens his mouth and... oh no.
Am I really so bad?
Yeah, Bobby. I'm sorry, but yeah, you are. It's a serious distraction in an otherwise perfect episode. When I spotlighted this episode in my blog, I likened it to the Mona Lisa, with a crayon mustache drawn on. That was a few years ago, so when I watched it again recently in preparation for this podcast, I was really hoping maybe I'd been too hard in my assessment. But unfortunately, my view has not changed. I mean, Redford has a few okay moments, but most of the time, it's frustrating for me because if he'd been played by somebody else, this could very well have been one of my favorite episodes of all time. I'm trying to think of who I'd rather see in the role. And this might be a bit unorthodox, but I think Jack Klugman could have totally pulled it off. First off, he'd be more believable as a beat cop, and I think the reveal would be a lot more surprising. Robert Redford already looks like a celestial being, which lessens the impact a bit. But Klugman could go either way, so it would be more of a surprise. Call me crazy, whatever. I can totally see it. As it stands, Nothing in the Dark is beautifully written, deceptively simple, and deeply moving. But unfortunately, it only has 2/3 of a great cast. It's like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is more or less perfect except for that ridiculous gremlin costume. So for me, the episode remains a Mona Lisa with a crayon mustache. Damn it. Like One for the Angels, Nothing in the Dark is scored with stock music from the CBS Music Library, including the cue Secret Circle by Jerry Goldsmith, which was also in The Howling Man, which we covered last week. Now, I'd mentioned that it sounded suspiciously similar to a Bernard Herrmann cue from his Hitchhiker suite. Turns out the Herrmann cue is in this episode too, so we have an excuse to directly compare them. Okay, so here's the Goldsmith cue first. Okay, Now here's The Hitchhiker Part 7 by Herman. Those are like really similar. I don't know when Goldsmith composed Secret Circle, or for that matter, where it even comes from originally, but Herman composed the Hitchhiker Suite back in the 40s when the radio play was first produced, and Goldsmith didn't really appear on the scene until the mid-50s, so, well, you do the math. Obviously, both of the cues were used here because of their similarity, but it wasn't the first time. Oh no, dear listeners, both cues were also used in Season 1's The Hitchhiker, which we're looking at next week. I never get tired of these cool music connections. Now between those two cues is a cut from Herman's Walking Distance score called The House. Here it plays during the pivotal moment when Mr. Death asks Wanda to take his hand. When we get more Walking Distance a bit later, a quick little cue called Curtain, which we hear at the beginning of Serling's closing narration. If you followed my blog between the years 2009 through 2014, well, first of all, thank you. Second, you may recall my mentioning that a theater troupe called Hellfire Productions here in Portland presented a series of stage productions based on Twilight Zone episodes in the mid-90s. Their first presentation consisted of The Obsolete Man, A Game of Pool, and Nothing in the Dark. They did several such shows, but I only caught that first one. I was a total theater geek in high school, so needless to say, I was fucking thrilled to see the Twilight Zone adapted for the stage, and it did not disappoint. I wonder if they videotaped it. Man, I need to track down these Hellfire people. At the end of Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal, Death finally catches up to Antonius Block, after the knight and his entourage have made it home, believing that they're safe and sound. It's a beautifully conceived sequence. We don't actually see Death. Instead, we see Death's point of view as he watches the various characters coming to terms with their fate. Some respect him, some revere him, some fear him. One smiles at the prospect of his embrace. It's like a microcosm of all mankind. But for Antonius Block, well, he prays feverishly to God for mercy after previously renouncing him out of bitterness. He, like Wanda Dunn, is above all things afraid of the eternal unknown that awaits him. In One for the Angels and Nothing in the Dark, we have two elderly folks trying to stay one step ahead of their own mortality. Mr. Death does ultimately catch up with both of them, but neither resolution constitutes a tragic end. Both Lou Bookman and Wanda Dunn acquiesce peacefully and even optimistically when their respective times finally do come. Now, it's interesting to compare the different approaches taken for these bookend episodes, which share the same basic story kernel. One for the Angels is more or less a light comedy with flashes of drama, while Nothing in the Dark is shadowy and elegiac with little to no humor. So we have light, and we have shadow, and here we stand between them. See what I did there? Comparing the two presents a bit of a conundrum. One for the Angels has a better Mr. Death, but Nothing in the Dark has a better protagonist. I prefer Nothing in the Dark because of its atmospheric quality. It's just weightier in general, but I can't declare it a winner in the Mr. Death standoff because, well, there's a whole other episode still to be examined. Season 1's The Hitchhiker, which originally aired in between these two episodes and which we'll be looking at next week. Spoiler alert, it's my favorite out of the three, so it has a really good chance of winning this three-way death match. Thumb a ride back this way next time and find out why. if you want to reach out and touch us with your cold, clammy touch of death, you can find us on both Facebook and Tumblr. Just do a search for @ZonePod and you'll find us. You can also email us at zonepod@gmail.com, and if you record your comments and or questions in an MP3, we might just play it on the air. Please note that we reserve the right to speed up, slow down, or otherwise manipulate your voice in any number of bizarre and potentially frightening ways. Your comments may also be edited for time and or content, and in extreme cases taken out of context entirely, or completely rewritten and re-recorded by someone impersonating you. Badly. So come back next time when we will conclude our special 2-part Mr. Death extravaganza. Till then, kids, don't fear the Reaper, and play nice.
Between light and shadow.
Excellent!